All I needed was that one person to motivate me to keep going, so here's another past life story. This one is about this set of sisters, 11-year-old Joanna and 6-year-old Jacqueline, who, along with their 9-year-old friend Anthony, were killed after being struck by an erratic driver on their way to church. Unfortunately, the girls died almost immediately after impact, and poor Anthony died on his way to the hospital. The erratic driver was a woman who actually did this on purpose after being forcibly removed from her own children not long before. The parents of Jacqueline and Joanna were, as you can imagine, devastated. Their mother, Florence, actually became pregnant not long after the girls' deaths, and their father, John, was convinced that his daughters were going to come back through this birth. He said that his wife was going to have a set of twins, and they were going to be the reincarnated girls, Jacqueline and Joanna. Florence was like, yeah, right. One, they were devout Catholics. She did not believe in reincarnation at all. There was also no history of twins on either of their families. And the doctor was telling her that this was a single birth. So she didn't believe anything that her husband was saying, whatever, brushed it off. Well, 9 months later, she gave birth to a set of twins, a set of twin baby girls. Meet Jillian and Jennifer. When the girls were just 3 months old, the family actually relocated to another town east of where they were currently living. And when the girls were about 4 years old, they moved back to the town that they were born in, the same town that Jacqueline and Joanna were killed in. When they got back to this town, Jennifer and Jillian started pointing out landmarks that they had never seen, but they were naming them off like they remembered them, including the school that Jacqueline and Joanna had gone to, as well as their favorite playground that they loved to play at. Shortly after this, they started asking Florence if they could have their toys back as if they owned them. And she never planned on giving these toys to them. She had them hidden away. But she did distribute them to them, just like they asked, and they separated these toys and played with them as if they were Jacqueline and Joanna. They even had the same names for these toys and remembered everything about them from before. Florence still wasn't convinced. John knew that these were his reincarnated girls. And they had the same personality traits, the same behaviors. So Joanna used to be very overprotective of Jacqueline as she was the older sister. And they had those same traits in them. Even though they were only 10 minutes apart, the older one would act as she was much older. Now, Florence was finally convinced that these were her reincarnated daughters when she walked in on them playing car accident, and they were reenacting the accident that Jacqueline and Joanna were killed in. Even laying down, holding one another's head and saying, this is where the blood was coming out. Do you think that these were her reincarnated daughters?
And we looked at her face, but her mouth wasn't moving.
Ed, no, 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 hold your, let me on there, no, give me, no, I don't want her. No, yeah, I'll do it. Ed, got hold a lot.
I think people thought at first that I was doing it deliberately, so tests were done.
Mr. Gross filled her mouth up with water when we all was watching, and the voice was still talking. And Mr. Gross asked him, where are you from?
I come from the grave.
Remember this creepy viral video of a girl laughing with no expression on her face? Well, this man was seen strangely laughing at his grandmother's funeral, and when people found out why, he had died. 25-year-old Willie Anderson received news that his mother had passed away. Extremely saddened and grieved by her passing, Willie and his family prepared for her burial. They gathered for an hour-long service at a church in London. But just as the gravediggers began lowering the grave into the ground, attendees heard a strange, muffled snorting sound. Slowly, the sound progressed into concealed giggles, then an explosion of roaring laughter. Shocked, everyone turned to see that Willie was laughing, doubling over. His laugh echoed among the graves as the attendees watched in horror and disbelief. Little did they know, his laughter was a sign of something worse yet to come. Part 2 out.
Facts you didn't know that could save your life one day. Now trust me, you're gonna want to favorite this video because at some point in your life you might need it. If you are drinking a drink and suddenly it tastes salty, stop drinking it because someone has put something in it. If you ever see square waves in the ocean, get out immediately. These are powerful currents that can pull you under the water and kill you in an instant. Always hold your nose when jumping into rivers or lakes. This acts as protection against dangerous amoeba that will crawl up your nose cavity upon impact. If you feel like you're about to throw up, start humming. It is nearly impossible to gag while you're humming. If you're ever in a survival situation, only drink milk from the green coconuts. The brown coconuts aren't your friend, because brown coconuts contain oils that cause dehydration. If your water smells like cinnamon, don't drink it. Some people often use this to cover up the scent of poison. If you ever get attacked or kidnapped, scratch your attacker. Their DNA will then be under your fingernails, helping the police to track and catch them.
This man was seen strangely laughing at his mother's funeral, and when people found out why, he had died. Part 2. Sorry for the wait. Willie could feel the eyes of the onlookers piercing him as he tried desperately to control his laughter. A few hours later, when his laughter still hadn't subsided, his family was concerned and took him to the hospital. The physician on duty, Dr. Ashley Clark, examined his pupils and vital signs, but oddly, nothing was apparently wrong. Still, Dr. Clark recommended that Willie stay under observation. But only 2 days later, Willie was found unconscious in his bed. Turns out he had suffered a subarachnoid hemorrhage, which is an uncommon type of stroke that causes damage on the surface of the brain. Postmortem revealed a large aneurysm in an artery that compressed the bottom of his brain. And when damaged, this part of the brain causes uncontrollable laughter and giggling. If you want to share a story,
This is a true horrifying story that took place in Pakistan. This story was submitted by Amna. In the early 2000s, a young Pakistani man worked in the Jinnah International Airport in Karachi. He would always ride his motorcycle to work, and he only did night shifts. One night, he finished his duty, hopped on his bike, and started driving home. All the roads were empty as it was past midnight. As he was driving, he saw a woman sitting on the edge of the road, crying. He was hesitant to approach, but he felt bad and approached her anyways. He asks, "Is everything okay?" She says, "I forgot my way home. Can you take me?" He says, "Of course." The woman hops on the back seat of the motorcycle and he starts driving down. The woman in the back seat starts sharing stories to this man. She tells him stories about the Pakistan and India partition in 1947 and how many people suffered and died during that era. And she would tell these stories very vividly, as if she lived back in these times. Moments later, she points at a deserted area on the side of the highway and she says, "This is where I died." He looks at her hand as she points and he realizes that this isn't an ordinary human being. His spine shivers from fear. He jumps off his motorcycle at a very high speed. He starts running with his injured arms and legs. He looks behind to see if the woman is behind him, and there she was, standing still from a distance without a single scratch. He luckily sees a police car approaching and he loses his mind. He explains everything to the police officer while the woman still stands and stares at him from a distance. The second he gets inside the police car, the woman vanishes. What could this be? Who is this woman?
Let me tell you about the spookiest demonic encounter I ever had. So I used to be a worship leader at a church, and I used to be married to a worship leader at a church. It was our first year of marriage, and we had just moved into a very small apartment, and it was in kind of a rough part of town. And well, one evening, me and my husband were just kind of hanging out on the little patio area outside our front door. It was dark. It was probably about 9 o'clock in the evening. And as we're sitting there just kind of talking, I look over my shoulder because something catches my eye. And I see a man standing probably 15 feet from us, dressed in solid black. He had like a hoodie on, like had a hood over his face, and I couldn't make out any facial features, but he was just standing there, just looking at us. And I look at my husband and I go, babe, let's go. That guy's creeping me out. And my husband kind of looks over there and he goes, okay. And he kind of ushers me back inside. We go inside, shut the door, lock the door. And I was like, what was that guy doing? That was just super creepy. He was just standing there staring at us. And my husband looks at me and he said, look, I didn't want to say this while we were outside because I didn't want to scare you, but there was nobody there. I said, nobody there? He was right there, like 15 feet away. He was just standing on the sidewalk staring at us. How could you have not seen him? And he said, I swear to God, babe, I looked right where you were looking. There was nobody on the sidewalk. This story gets creepier. Not long after this, my husband wakes me up in the middle of the night. We're laying in bed together and he's like, babe, wake up. And so I kind of stir awake and I'm like, what? And he's like, are you the one sitting here tapping on the headboard? And I'm like, what? He's like, I've been laying here awake for like 30 minutes and I thought maybe you were just laying there like trying to prank me and scare me. I'm like, knocking on the headboard. He's like, yeah, it's just been going like just right behind my head. And I thought maybe it was your hand and you were trying to do it to scare me. And I said, no, I'm not knocking on the headboard. And he's like, okay, super weird. We go to sleep. He wakes up, I don't know how long it was, but he wakes up and he wakes me up again. He was like, oh my God, I just had the most demonic, terrifying dream. And I'm going to tell y'all about that dream and how it came true.
Have you ever heard about Abigail Project? It's about a girl whose father was scientist in Area 51. Albert Houston offered his daughter to participate in his experiment. With this experiment, girl would have had superpowers. The goal of American government was to create super soldiers. At the beginning of experiment, everything was fine. But suddenly the girl fell. Her appearance changed terribly and became dangerous. Her father killed himself, and the monster girl was taken to cell in Area 51. One day the girl escaped from cell, killed 2 guards and disappeared. The story doesn't end there. In 2019, an audio recording was released when an American citizen calls 911 and tells them that his dog was killed by a 2-meter tall woman. Then he starts screaming and recording stops.
Yeah, my dog was killed here just recently. Whatever it was that was standing up. I'm out here looking through the window now. Jesus Christ, you better...
Huling-huli naman sa kamera ang pag-atake ng isang mangkukulam sa isang lalaki. Panoorin natin ang video. Habang nakatayo ang lalaking ito, ay bigla na lamang siyang sinunggaban ng isang nilalang na animoy na kasakay pa sa isang walis tingting at nakasuot ito ng kulay itim at kung mapapansin natin, ang kanyang itsura ay...
The artist Doja Cat has just removed all content from her TikTok and has made this image her new profile picture, which is evidently supposed to be some type of demonic satanic creature. And some of you out there might say, oh, this is just for shock value, but you fail to understand that all of us in this world cannot escape the reality of the supernatural. Because in Romans chapter 6 and verse 16, the Bible tells us, know ye not that to whom ye yield yourselves servants to obey, his servants ye are to whom ye obey, whether sin unto death or obedience unto righteousness. We either willingly are living in the service of Jesus, or by default or by choice, we are living in the service of Satan. And if you willingly listen to the music of Doja Cat, you are willingly placing yourself under the influence of the satanic power that is influencing her too. Think about it, and whether you like it or not.
Urban legends from around the world. The legend of Highway Sheila, located on Higginson Highway near Chatsworth, South Africa. Here's the story. There's a lot of different versions on how she came to be, but this is my favorite. Sheila was a young girl killed in a terrible accident on the highway. Due to her untimely death, she took to haunting to get revenge on the motorist who killed her. Described as a beautiful young Indian girl with long hair, she is said to hitchhike along the highway, captivating young men with her beauty. There's been numerous accidents and deaths on the highway. They actually nicknamed it Death's Highway. Due to the alarming number of accidents on the highway, the residents of Chatsworth actually think Highway Sheila is to blame. There's even a 2014 movie about it. Which country is next?
If you can make it through this entire video, I guarantee you won't be able to sleep tonight. A man was working late at night when he received a notification that there was detected movement on his son's baby monitor. He checked the app, expecting to see that his 3-year-old son had just coughed or sneezed loudly. But when he looked at the baby cam, he was shocked to see his son and wife acting very strange. They were sitting on the bed together, both glaring at the camera with blank, emotionless stares. He assumed that the camera was just frozen, but noticed that his wife and son were blinking every couple of seconds. He then called his wife to make sure everything was okay, and she told him that she was in bed with her son and he had gotten scared a couple of minutes ago and came into her room crying. The husband was stunned. He slowly told his wife that they were both in their son's room, looking into the baby monitor. Just as the wife was about to respond, there was a loud screech and the call ended. The man then went to check the baby monitor, and it was complete static. I can guarantee that the end of this video is going to shock you. There was a young girl who had trouble making friends because her mom wouldn't let her play with the other kids in the neighborhood. One day, the mom left to go to the store, so she snuck outside of the house. She grabbed her teddy bear and went outside, but still, none of the kids wanted to play with her. Eventually, a strange-looking boy approached her and said that he wanted to be her friend. The little girl was thrilled to finally have a friend her age, and he eventually asked if she wanted to come to his house to play. When they arrived, the little girl was confused, because the house appeared to be abandoned like no one had been in there for years. They walked into his garden and immediately the girl threw up. She asked him for some water and he just smiled at her creepily and said, "You're going to sleep here sometime soon." Weeks later, the girl went looking for him and he was nowhere to be found. Soon, a paper airplane flew to her and it was a newspaper clipping. She opened it up to find that the boy she'd been playing with went missing 9 years ago.
Remember this unexplained viral video of an unusual family that no one seems to know much about? Well, this is the man who found them, and you won't believe what happened to him. Visual artist Mark Leda was driving through West Virginia on his mission to get pictures of interesting people from every state. On a rest stop, he ran into a local police officer and asked him if there was anyone in the area worth photographing. The officer told him there was a spot he could show him, but that he was going to have to bring a video camera. The next day, the cop picked up Mark, and after a long drive on a narrow forest road, they finally reached a small shack on the side of the road. And that's when Mark saw the craziest thing he had ever seen, something he said reminded him of the movie Deliverance. He said he saw people with their eyes pointing in different directions, with some barking at him, unable to speak. One guy would scream if he talked to him and run away to kick a garbage can. But after what happened next, Mark realized he made a big mistake. Part 2 is already out, just tap over here.
I went to Reddit to find the most unexplained supernatural or paranormal events that people had ever gone through. And this is what I found. I was annoyed with my daughter because she hadn't cleaned up her room in weeks, so when I walked by her room and saw her standing there, I assumed she was doing what I said. A few minutes later, she walked out of the shower in the bathroom with a towel wrapped around her and asked why I was looking at her strangely. When I asked her who was in her room, she looked scared too. I never figured out who was in there, but we didn't clean up the room either. 6 out of 10. Was spending the night at a friend's house as a kid around 12 or 13. Parents weren't home, so we decided to go out, do some ding-dong ditching, get into some young angsty debauchery. We get home and it's around 1 or 2 in the morning. Cue a ringing of the doorbell. Naturally, we think it's the cops or some pissed off neighbor. My friend had a small window that looked out onto the front porch and you couldn't really see into it from outside. So we took a peek at who was calling at such a late hour. Standing at the door was an old woman in a dress and a young boy in a weird newsy outfit. Both were dressed extremely out of period as it was the 90s, and my friend had never seen them either in the neighborhood before. We ducked because we're a bit freaked, look again less than 10 seconds later and they're both gone. Nobody on the street walking away, no cars driving away, they were just gone without a trace. We did not sleep well. That's a good one. That was a good one. 7.8 out of 10. That one was kind of freaky, and they were all kind of freaky, but it makes sense because this